So welcome here tonight. I want to thank a few people, thank our visitors, Doug and Sarah, for coming down from Denver and from New York City. Thanks Mark and Chuck for giving them a tour of Boulder on our e-bikes today. Thanks to Boulder Store to come here to sign books. And thanks to our volunteers and staff, many of whom are here, who without them, none of this would be possible. So just a few things before we start. If you are not a member of Community Cycles, I encourage you to become a member. None of this happens without membership. Jennifer's showing you the member card, but it's also online. And membership is what makes us strong. Membership is what makes us be able to go to the city and say, we have 2,500 members. And they'll be surprised to know in Boulder, that's probably one of the biggest memberships of a nonprofit group. I think it might be the biggest. And, but even so, we need more. We need to be bigger and more powerful. So I encourage you to join us so we have that power. So first I'm going to introduce Martha Skowski, and she's going to take the program from here. Thank you very much for coming.
We got here middle of the day, so I'm safe to say that we're experts on Boulder by now. The trail system is amazing. You know, we went all Martha showed us around and Chuck, and it was great. Like to have that in every direction, to not be able to not have to put a foot down when you're riding is pretty special. Some of the on-street infrastructure is really good to see. The drivers here are very courteous. You might not think so, but from our perspective, they seem much better than a lot of other cities. Like we were exiting some of the alleyways that we were going down, really safer routes, and we would come out mid-block, and drivers would stop, like as if they anticipated us coming. So, did someone just go like, I just heard someone who shut up. Yeah. So that was really great. Yeah, thanks for the good weather today too. So we had a great time. A really good first impression.
So I've been covering bicycle and transportation issues as a reporter since about 2006. And I cannot tell you how many times people have told me, Boulder is Boulder. Like if everywhere could be like Boulder, then we'd be set because Boulder has it all figured out. Boulder is perfect. Boulder is like a paradise where everybody's like whizzing around and there's little bluebirds and puppies going after everybody as they go down this trail network. And of course, as a New Yorker, where I grew up in New York and there was not even one single bike lane in the city of New York, and now we do have a lot of great biking in New York, but it just seemed like this unattainable paradise. And it kind of is. I mean, I gotta say, if somebody else was saying to me tonight, like, oh, well, I go somewhere else and I come back, I'm like, maybe we shouldn't complain too much about here. But the point is that everybody deserves more and better. Just because it's great in so many ways doesn't mean that it's perfect. And I will say that I was in my fantasy version of Boulder. It did not include big roads. It did not include strip malls. It did not include huge lifted trucks. It did not include.
I knew it was fun.
Okay. But I thought that maybe they didn't have that here. So I was I think that my fantasy was punctured a little bit. But in a good way, in that, hearing, especially from Martha and Chuck, the other advocates we've been able to talk to, that there are things that you need to improve here, and it's sort of like the conversation is happening at a very high level. And so, but that doesn't mean that improvement isn't necessary, and that doesn't mean that stupid things aren't still happening, and that doesn't mean that there's not a lot of the people in the community who don't necessarily get why a 4-to-3 conversion on Iris, perhaps, is a good idea. So anyway, it's kind of almost reassuring to realize that even in paradise, there is room for improvement, and that that we can all learn from each other, right? no matter, that's one thing we've really been discovering as we've been out on the road, is that wherever you are, there are problems and there are things that you can learn, and every community has something to offer to this conversation and something to learn and to get from the conversation. So I think that's kind of what I've been thinking. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I think I had a similar to the Rose Party glasses view of Boulder when I read about it through like People for Bikes and other organizations. So to see the good, the bad, and the ugly, on a quick tour, as brief as we've been here, it's good. Like Martha knew what she was doing and taking us around to the trail system and some of the busier roads through the strip mall, the other side of town where things are a little less bike friendly. So no, it's good. It's one of the best parts. It has been exactly what I said. Like every town is facing, whether it's a city of 8.5 million people or a city of a few 100,000 people, or a tiny little town. Every town is facing the same problems, the same successes, same arguments for bike lanes, the same arguments against bike lanes. So it's very reassuring.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've worked in a lot of different cities, and I tell you what, every city you go to, people would say, well, you don't understand. It's different here.
Yeah.
And like you say, it's not really.
Not.
I mean, it's all flavors of the same challenges, the same conversations, the same arguments. Okay, let's talk about this.
Yes.
Rather than do a reading, will you tell us about this book and making this book?
Yeah. So we've had the podcast, The War on Cars, for just over 7 years, which is something that I never thought that we would be sitting here saying. I think that I read somewhere that I think it's 93% of podcasts make 3 or fewer episodes, and we've made 162. So, as somebody who was always a writer first, and that's like a writer is part of my identity, I think there was always a part of me that thought it would be really great to write a book, and we had talked about it over the years, and then we were approached by an agent who said, you could make this into a book, and then we were approached by an editor who thought the same thing, and eventually,
Literally the same people.
yeah, we put those two people together in the end, and the result is this book. And one of the things that, if you're not in the book business or the media business per se, that I just want to emphasize is that this book is it's a Penguin Random House imprint. This is a major publisher, and so I think for us, one of the most exciting things about the book has been precisely that a major publisher, it's not a niche publisher, it's not a special interest publisher, not an academic press, a major publisher thought that this was marketable. And that's because of you in this room and all the people like you all over this country. They thought, we can sell this thing. And so to me, as somebody who has seen the evolution of the awareness come so far in 20 years, that was just incredibly valuable.
Yeah, and I think so. The challenge with a book like this is, when we talk about the publisher, is that I often say, so I used to work in television production. I did a lot of stuff for the History Channel. And so let's say you're producing a documentary about Abe Lincoln. Well, the people who are going to tune into that are the people who know everything about Abe Lincoln, and the people who are just flipping the channel and land on it, don't know that much. Oh, that'll be interesting. I'll watch. And you have to satisfy both audiences. That's very hard to do. If you listen to the podcast, you might hear that a little bit. Like, we stop to define terms like induced demand. And if you know what induced demand is, you're not going to be upset if you stop to define it. And in fact, almost like game show style, you might be like, I know what induced demand is. You're like, yes, their definition matches mine. But if you
By
don't,
the way, it's that building one more lane
isn't going to fix it.
isn't going to fix it because it's
It'll
going
make
to
it worse.
induce
Yeah.
the demand for that lane.
but then the people who don't know what it is learn something. So that's what we tried to do with the book. It's like there's a lot in there that if you listen to the show or if you are really steeped in these issues, like I'm sure some of you are, you're gonna be like, okay, that's cool. I knew that. They described that well, and I agree with like their take on that. I disagree, like that's fine too. But we hope that there will be things in there that surprise you. There were things in there that doing the research or handing chapters back and forth. Like I would read some of Sarah's chapters she worked on and be like, holy shit, I had no idea that in the nature chapter, for example, that some of the problems she described like were worse than I could have even imagined. And you know, some of the research was really surprising that I did I wrote the chapter on childhood. So, you know, that process was really fun. I really consider myself to be a lifelong learner. It's what I love about doing the podcast. I get to talk to really interesting people, whether they're civilian activists or government officials or experts. And I learned something, and I learned a lot writing the book. And I still like to go back and flip through and like, oh, yeah, I remember that. That was cool. Yeah. It was a fun process. It was a lot of work.
Yeah, and we wrote it pretty quickly. We wrote it in about 9 months, and that is a fast turnaround. But hey, we got it done. We met every deadline.
Yeah.
Is there a sequel?
Cyclists always arrive on time.
Is there a sequel? Well, I mean, I would love to write another book, and we have talked a little bit about what that might look like if it happens. So it kind of depends on.
This one has to sell well. So
this one has to sell well. The holidays are coming up. So one of the things that and speaking of that, like I do encourage people, and we kind of designed the book to do this, is that if you have somebody in your life who is a friend or a family member who is an intelligent, thoughtful person, but maybe doesn't think about this issue or doesn't know about this issue at all, or maybe thinks that you're a little nutty for riding your bicycle everywhere. You know, this is the book that I hope that you would put in that person's hands. And that was what I was thinking about when I was writing. And then I was so validated because we were in Portland, Oregon, and I have a friend who lives in a co-housing community there. And I went to their weekly potluck. And I was talking to my friend, and I pushed across the table, I pushed her a sticker that had the book cover on it. And the person next to me who didn't know me, didn't know who I was, said, "Oh, my dad just read that book." And I was like, "Really?" It had only been out for like 2 weeks at that point. I was like, "Really? How did your dad get turned on to this book?" And she said, "Well, I just gave up my car, and my dad is worried about it." So apparently he went on Amazon or I don't know where, and was like, "Give me a book that explains how somebody lives without a car." And he got that, and then he went and left a 5-star review on Goodreads, and he really liked it. So yeah, like that's what we're trying to do, and we find that there's just like such an appetite for the things that we're talking about. And yeah, so that's been really exciting. Yeah.
All right, I have 2 more questions, and then want to hear from all of you what your questions are.
Yeah.
Before can I just say, we have done some really big events, and we've done smaller events, and this is our last event for 2025, and it's really cool to be in a room this size. It is really fun and to be with people in this space, like that is doing such good work. Like it is fun to be in the big room. Don't get me wrong, but like I have a feeling everybody here is doing something pretty awesome and support, like even if you're just supporting Community Cycle. So I just want to like savor the moment for a little bit and say like it's pretty awesome, all the stuff that you do. So yeah.
Yeah, and this
is
like,
amazing.
This place, I mean, give yourselves a round of applause. Yeah.
That's a fabulous segue into my next question. So you're wrapping up this leg of a tour. You were in Denver last night. You were in Houston before that. Like, what did you say? What has surprised you or delighted you about visiting all of these cities and getting a little glimpse into what's happening in them?
What's delighted me, really the people. I mean, obviously getting to see lots of different cities some of which I've been to before, others like Boulder that I've never been to before. That's been really fun, eating the food, seeing the sights, meeting people. That's been really fun. But it's really been the people. It's a really tough time in politics and in the world in general. So to meet people who have said, like, I just want to make this little corner of the world a little better, where none of us are fixing healthcare or the Supreme Court or anything like that. But we are, in a way, there's something about building places for people that is a fight against fascism, that is a way to support democracy and community in the community cycles. Community building is a good way to do that. So everywhere we go, we meet the best advocates. It'd be really tough for me to say where's the best advocates. I could kiss your butt and say you're all the best advocates, but everywhere has been the best advocates because it's just people who care about where they live, who know why it's special, but who understand that it could be even better. Even if you just increase cycling a little bit, right? Or transit use a little bit, or public space a little bit, it'd be better. So to meet people who are just so enthusiastic and fighting in places like, let's say, Houston, where the odds are really stacked against them, where you have state DOTs expanding highways, for example, and yet people are still going. And part of why I like being an advocate is because I like all the other advocates who are doing all the other good work that they're doing, and that keeps me going. So I'm going home with like my cup overflowing, and that's really been pretty great. Yeah.
I would say that the thing that has surprised me the most, is we have had, in pretty much every big show that we have had an elected official on the stage with us. And there was a time when we launched this podcast that we could not get an elected official to come on the podcast because the name is so confrontational. And, the name of the book is intentionally less confrontational, and that is something that we talked about with the publisher. Originally, we thought it would just be called The War on Cars, the book, or whatever. But a lot of the time, elected officials didn't want to be associated with this movement and this issue because it was just so controversial, so inflammatory, whatever. And now, in pretty much every place we went, including Houston, we had elected officials sitting on the stage and proudly saying, no, this is where I want to be. This is where I have to be. And that to me says that this movement has done successfully what I was not sure that it was going to do. It has made itself into a movement that needs to be listened to by politicians. And if those politicians see you now as their constituents, and it's like for a long time I felt like we were invisible to politicians. And so I think that is the thing that has surprised me the most. And what has delighted me the most, I will have to say, is that the average age of our audiences has been very young. And no offense to people like me who are older, because we have our place in the world too. But I have just been overwhelmed. We've had high school students, we've had college students galore, we've had so many people doing graduate programs, so many people age 30 and under, 35 and under, who are just, they're doing the work. They are out there, they're planners, they're organizers, and that has just, it makes me want to cry every time. I love it. Thank you.
Yeah. And I'll share a really funny moment because I'm thinking of there are more people in this room than probably go to a meeting about cycling in your town, right? Like maybe 40 people, if you're lucky, show up and they yell at each other about cycling. When we were in our show in Brooklyn, this guy, we did a Q&A, and the guy at the end stood up. Remember the guy from Oklahoma City? This guy stands up and said, I just moved here 6 weeks ago or whatever from Oklahoma City. And before he could even finish the sentence, everyone's cheering. And I stopped everybody. I said, can I just remark for a moment that if this were a community, everyone would be screaming at you to go back to Oklahoma City. But that's the strength of the movement. movement. We're so welcoming, and like, someone shows up to community cycles and wants to pitch in. Someone shows up to a meeting, wants to speak up because they just moved here and they want to make it safer to get where they're going. Like, welcome. We welcome you to the movement. So that's been really fun too. And we've seen that happen in a few places. Like, oh, I just moved here, and I heard you guys are coming, and then they sign up for whatever advocacy organization is there and hosting. You're all probably involved with stuff, but like, we've had some events where people are just like, I don't know how to get involved. Go sign up. The table's over there. That's how you get involved. Yeah.
Okay, this is a little bit of an ethnic question. I know last night you said if you're going to ask the question, make it a question. I have a little bit of preamble to my question. Okay, we're going to go a little bit deep in the wonky world. So I've been thinking about the recent progress Colorado's made on land use. Like our state legislature has told cities across the state to make it easier to build housing around transit, to be able to add ADUs, to get rid of parking minimums. And so that kind of systems change at that level elevated these arguments from all the neighbors coming out with pitchforks about a single development to just say, look, this is in the common good. We need housing. We're going to make this happen. There was real pushback in Colorado from a lot of the local governments, like, that's local control. Don't you dare touch our local control. But I think some of the more progressive leaders were like, okay, we don't have to stand up and do this, the state. In the fight world, we are still stuck fighting every single bike lane. It's a separate process, and the pitchforks are out. And I would say City of Boulder, kudos for doing really thorough public process. I mean, the public process on Iris, there was research, there was studies, there were information, there were public meetings in every format you can possibly imagine. And council adopted it unanimously, but to have to do that kind of process on every single bike lane, and it doesn't get easier. It's not like, oh, we got that one through, the next one's going to be easy. Have you been thinking, I've been thinking about, like, is there a way to scale this? Could it be that, like, the plan writ large gets adopted and then we just go do all of them? So my question is, do you have any insight into that? Like, we've got this hyper-localized democracy that we deploy around bike lanes, that everybody gets to come out and be like, no, don't do that. I don't care about safety. Do it somewhere else. I love what we hear. I love bikes, but do it somewhere else. So can we get out of this morass of having to fight every single bike lane? Thank you for your patience with my
no, that's a great set of context for that question. I mean, yes, I hope we can. I have some examples, I guess. So in New York, for example, to get just bike parking, on-street bike corral that would take 1 or 2 car parking spaces, we used to have to go to the community board, which we would jokingly refer to as the parking board, because all they cared about was people with parking. And we had to do that. And so you're talking about fighting over Sue in the back. Jeff, I remember her brother Jeff, who lives in Brooklyn, I remember he would pull me aside at some community meeting. He was like, you gotta fight every fucking inch. Like, this is what we're doing. And, but we kept fighting for every fucking inch and every bike corral. And eventually, through our lobbying and saying this is ridiculous, the de Blasio administration removed bike corral placement out of the community process. It can just be now, you want one, if it meets the requirements and you get some support from the neighbors, you don't need to go door to door, you get it, like, as long as it meets all of the requirements that the city has. So you don't have to do that. So that's a bright spot, and that's how we've been able to move the needle a little bit. I think you do need to have, like, for example, Mamdani, right, who's just won on, like, fast and free buses. So when he comes to your neighborhood, my neighborhood, to say we're going to put a new bus lane in here and it's going to be free and all the rest, he can say, I ran on this and I won on this, and so we're going to do this. Now, we might tinker around the edges, and maybe the bus stop goes on this block and not on this block. This guy needs his loading zone and whatever. But I think that's what we need. We need elected officials who, when they run on things, say that was the public process. I'm going to run on installing 200 miles of on-street protected bike lanes in Boulder. Cover much of the city if we did that. Really important spots. Why then would we have to, after you announce that, go back and say, well, this quarter mile, we're going to go talk to the 12 houses on the street and see what those. Of course, they're going to say no. So you need to say two things. The election is the process, and the project is the process. You do the thing, and then people get over whatever fears they have of the thing. That's not to say you ram stuff down people's throat. You do have to talk to people. Neighborhood input is important. Like I said, the guy said, I've got a loading zone right there. Don't put the bike share station right there. Move it 2 doors down. That's important. But I think we need to move from a not whether or not we're doing something, but just to a how we're doing something. That's where the community is. It's not a great answer. I think we have a long way to go until we just see bike lanes and transit as you need sewage, removal on your street, trash removal on your street, snow plowing on your street, and you need a sidewalk on your street, and bike lanes on your street. We have a long way to go before we get there. But I think you just got to keep hammering, and then eventually it will become normal. Sorry, not the most satisfying answer I know, but yeah.
I didn't think you were going to call.
I wish I could. Yeah.
Yeah, but that really jives with so the city that has been transformed the most in the last 10 years globally, I would say, is Paris, right? And those of you who've been there recently, who maybe were there 10 years ago, it's completely different. They've taken cars off the banks of the Seine, and now it's a park, and now you can actually swim in the Seine. And the Rue de Rivoli is bike boulevard, and all of these things were very controversial. It's really important to recognize that Parisians yelled and screamed about it. They sued over it. Motorist groups sued about they wanted to keep the road on the banks of the Seine. And back in 2020, I talked to Deputy Mayor Christophe Najdovsky, who was in the Hidalgo administration, and I said to him, I was like, how did you handle all the backlash and we have that here and it's so scary and whatever. And he was very calm and also very handsome and stylish in a French way. Yeah. And he said, he said exactly what Doug said. We ran on this. We said we were going to do this. So of course we're going to follow through. That we would not be doing our job if we didn't do what we said we were going to do. And that's what you need. You need those political leaders who are going to just say, this was the policy I told you I was going to do, and now I'm going to do it. Now, that's easier said than done, but I do think that the generational shift that's happening, that Zohran Mamdani is part of, Katie Wilson in Seattle is part of, there are many, many politicians, some of whom we have been lucky enough to sit on stages with who are at, less high-profile positions, city council members and state senators and so forth. And those people, there is a generation coming into power right now that gets this in a different way. And part of it is the climate crisis is defining issue for this generation, and they don't have their heads in the sand about it the way that my generation and older generations do. So I think that finding those politicians who are also tend to be, in my observation, much more honest and willing to talk about, yeah, this is tough, but this is what I believe. And then supporting those people, electing them, and then supporting them and giving them all the positive feedback that they need, because they will be hearing from the negative people. Yeah. They will be hearing a lot of that. So remember to not just call your council member or your state rep or whatever to complain. Do that. But also, when they do something right, call them and get your friends to call them, because they need that. And so, yeah, I think that there is a shift happening, and that if the advocacy community stays focused and organized, then we can really leverage that societal, like the bigger generational shift that's happening.
Yeah.
So that's,
I would also add that I don't think any of this stuff is all that controversial anymore. It's just that the political incentives are a little messed up. Like Sarah was saying, people who don't like stuff have more of an incentive to call their elected officials, right? Remove the bike lane is a lot easier thing to call and ask for than can you please put a bike lane that doesn't exist yet somewhere. That's a hard thing to call and get them to act on immediately. The media treats this still as controversial, but it's not. We were interviewed in Boston on a public radio program, and one of the hosts, we were told, was like very carbon and like hates the bike lanes in Boston. And he brought up the fact that like during the election, they recently had a mayoral election, it became a political football. Bike lanes were like the big issue. And like, what do you say to the people who believe, who don't like the bike lanes and think this stuff is controversial, et cetera? Well, I said Michelle Wu won that election by like literally, I think she got like 90% of it. Like I was like, I said she racked up the sod number. It was like, you couldn't do that well. And I was like, so like these things are great for clicks and eyeballs in the local news, but I think that most people when they live in a city, even a city like Boulder, they understand that cities can be and should be dynamic places that change, and that people things change. Businesses go out of business, and new businesses move in. Streets change, and sometimes we rename a street to honor someone who died recently. Like things change. And if you just talk to people, I mean, we were just learning. We walked on the Pearl Street Mall. We heard that was a huge fight back in the day. Can you imagine someone running on a platform right now of rip out the Pearl Street Mall and let's turn we need 50 more parking spaces right in the middle of it? They would be laughed out of it. They totally would.
maybe not.
I mean, right.
Just let us have our fantasy.
But I just don't think these things are really as controversial as we're always led to believe. It's just that the wrong people have the incentive to speak up. Yeah.
Great. Questions? Gary.
How's congestion pricing going?
Amazing.
Like a really good idea. How can we export it to other cities?
Well, unfortunately, right now you can't because this federal government will not sign off on a single city anywhere in this country to allow it to happen. However, I do think that cities should be getting their studies in order and starting to lay the groundwork that if we do have some sort of change in government and people are ready for a new administration that is progressive and open to this stuff, that Chicago, San Francisco, Denver is ready to go with congestion pricing to get the approvals they need. It's been amazing. So there was just a study that particulate matter in the congestion pricing zone was down by 22%, and then outside the congestion pricing zone, it was down by 8 to 10%, something like that.
Yeah.
My favorite stat on congestion pricing is that 311 noise complaints near the Holland and Lincoln tunnels on the west side of Manhattan, the honking has been reduced. Bus speeds are faster. We've had some buses that have to hold at stations to stay on their schedule because they're arriving early. Traffic is flowing better. Drivers are starting to, the polling is showing that drivers, especially drivers who live outside of the 5 boroughs, are really liking it. I think it's going to take some time for the transit improvements to show up. That's always going to lag. But it's been great. Cycling in the city just feels much more comfortable, partially because of noise, I think, but also just because there are just fewer cars around. If you have not been to New York since it went into effect and you were to go tomorrow, next month, whatever, you would notice it. It's that noticeable. Yeah, it's amazing. Let's have some more good questions. That was a good question. Eric.
You all said you started your podcast about 7 years ago. I'm curious what you've seen and how the movement has progressed since then, and kind of what you're hoping for in the next phase, after your book is out and really changes everything.
Yes. Well, first of all, the book is going to change the whole world. and it's gonna.
It's a silver bullet.
That's
right.
exactly right. Just everybody just needs to buy a copy.
Buy one copy and put on every seat in the state legislature.
But actually, we did a Reddit AMA on the Fuck Cars Reddit subreddit, and somebody, or no, I guess it wasn't during the AMA. It was but it was on that subreddit that somebody said like, we love this book, like. You know what? We should buy a copy for every hotel room in America. Like, that would, our publisher would have been so happy. But and they like actually even like calculated how much it cost. It's really fun. But yeah, like I think that so I started not as an advocate. I started as a journalist, and like it's just. The openness to the conversation. It used to be something that I really like. People would ask me what I was working on, and I just didn't want to tell people, especially when we started the war on cars. I didn't want to have that conversation with every single person that I met, explaining. Oh, I don't mean that I really want a war, but like the attitudes have changed just radically. Like I would say that like it's really noticeable that people that you just wouldn't expect, older people who live in car dependent places, when you say like, we just think that we shouldn't have to drive as much, and it shouldn't be the only way that you can get around. You shouldn't have to get in your car every time you want to do something. You should have choices. And they're like, yeah, that would be great. And like, that has changed. So like just the conversation, and again, that's the combined efforts of thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of people across this country and this continent who have been working inside and outside government, inside city planning agencies, for, engineering firms, and who are advocates and journalists, and all of that has just, the conversation is so much more evolved. So I think that we need to feel that strength. Like we really need to build on that and to realize that like, we don't necessarily have to, we might be able to start having a more systemic fight, and there's an appetite for it. And I think, the affordability crisis, which is not a hoax, is another point where you can say to people, God, do you know how much a new car costs? Do you know how much it costs to insure a car? And why should you be paying all that money to these corporations? Like that's a line of argument that now people are like, oh yeah, why am I doing that? Yeah. And so I think like the conversation has just moved tremendously. And then also just really the infrastructure is there in so many places that it hasn't been. So not every place had what Boulder has had all this time, and not everybody had that foundation to build on. But we were in Houston, okay? Like, if you haven't been to Houston and
don't go. don't post that.
Don't say that.
Don't post it.
But if you haven't been to Houston and you have an idea of what Houston is like, it is like that. It is. I was like, I'm willing to believe that I'm going to get there and it's going to be so different. It's not. It's 22
But they
lanes.
have good on-street infrastructure in places.
Yes, that's the thing. They have really good bike infrastructure all over the city, like protected bike lanes. We went on a pretty long ride with folks, and they took us to a bunch of different neighborhoods, and yeah, there's protected bike lanes. Now, some of them are getting ripped out because they've got us mayor that absolutely sucks.
Yeah.
You can print that. Yeah. It does. But yeah, like that is happening in Houston, that Houston wanted us to go there, and we had a good audience there. It was, so that's like, that's happening. And there's this stuff. And so because bike infrastructure is on the street in pretty much everywhere now, like more people know what it is. And I've been saying, like, one of the problems in North America and the United States in particular is that people don't know how to use cities. They really, like, so many people just have, like, never spent much time in the city or any time. They've heard about how scary and horrible they are. And, and so if you're going to introduce these urbanist kind of pieces of infrastructure, ideas, movements into their streets, like, a lot of the time people need to be educated about how to use that stuff. But that is a process that is happening. And those lanes are on the street and people are seeing how they get used. And I do think there's like a giant learning process happening in this country at this time. And so that's really exciting.
I'll give you a good example of like how I think it's changed. When Bloomberg left office in 2013 in New York City and the mayoral election was happening, we founded an organization called Streets Back because we were really worried that the next mayor was going to be terrible and the next city council was going to be terrible. And in fact, when de Blasio ran, he called Jeanette Sadik-Khan radical, and every candidate was saying, bike lanes, I'm not sure I want to keep moving forward with stuff. Then when Eric Adams ran for office during the primary, every candidate was trying to outdo each other about how many miles of bike lanes they were going to put in. I'm going to 200 miles of bike lane. Eric Adams said 300 miles of bike lane. Now, he sucked. He was terrible. But like the fact that they saw that it was politically advantageous to promise good things on bikes was a big change. Then flash forward to Mamdani, and he's like posting his city bike stats, and you probably all seen the video of the person yelling at him, communist, and he goes, no, it's pronounced cyclist. So it's like, how far we've come. That and now it's just a matter of course that he's going to expand and improve upon the bike lane network in New York. So I think that to me has been the best metric of how the movement has changed. My own backyard.
Elaine, you have it in the
Yeah,
and then
I'm curious about your observations because usually they have to do with other things. People who want to office, so reading service, writing stuff, we're so much that, but it also, that was one special how that I could hear, this is about topics, and it's something like driving between work and stuff, like I'm not saying to do more, like I was and so I'm just concerned about how to, if people practice things, people recognize that moving is so wrong because I'm walking stuff that's entirely go up and terrible.
You can't put every driver on the couch. Like that's gonna be a really hard thing. But I agree that people are on edge, even with especially with the political situation and how divided people are in the little anger machines we're all carrying around in our pockets. I think that's all a problem. So what you have to do is just continue to improve the infrastructure. So it's it's not just some painted crosswalk for pedestrians. It's bulb outs and a raised crosswalk, and so the drivers get that they are the guests in this situation, and the pedestrians and cyclists have the right of way. So I think we need more of that from our elected officials. Transit is tough because the funding is drying up at the federal level, and every state, every town is doing more with less or less with less. But we got to get ridership back, and the only way we're going to do that is more service. So I think we just need those political leaders who are saying this, we don't need to make money on this. It's a public service. We just need to start making the frequency. I don't have a good answer for that either. It's just, we need the right leadership. That's really what it is.
Yeah, and I have to say that also we need to organize about transit specifically, and there are in many cities there are really great advocacy organizations that are pushing on transit, and it does have effects. Like in the Bay Area, they were facing some really bad cutbacks. That still might happen, but the politicians sort of freaked out because there was actually a big outcry about it. So I think that, like, first of all, organize. Everybody came here and not a member of community cycles or something like it. Get organized, because that's the only way that we can be part of the change. But I will say that, again, New York is a different kind of place. There's no question. But the fact that Zohran Mamdani had 3 main planks in his campaign, and one of them was about buses. And you can argue whether buses should be free. We had a whole episode about that. There's a lot of diversity of opinion about it, and I think it all, it deserves to be listened to and thought about. But the fact is that 3 planks that he repeated over and over again, one of them was buses. Whoever elevates buses and bus riders, and he won with that.
And Katie Wilson, the transit organizer.
Katie Wilson, transit organizer in Seattle.
Yeah.
She won. She beat an incumbent, and she won really against the odds. And so I think that, again, there's a moment here that we can seize, and we can listen to the fact that Zohran won that way and say, like, oh, like, people may not hate buses as much as we've been told. We know for sure that people don't hate trains as much as we've been told, right?
Amtrak is doing pretty well. all
People
things considered.
love freaking trains, right? Like, they started this service between Chicago and Minneapolis, and
Or the
like,
Mardi Gras line for New Orleans, right? It's doing really well.
yeah, like, I mean, and so, like, let's not feel like we're less than. Let's not accept the stigma that is attached to transit ridership. Let's just, let's push right now. So I do think that it has to be organized, and it's not going to be easy, but being loud about, also, this is something we talked about in the book, and there's a great book by a disability rights advocate named Anna Zivart. It's called When Driving is Not an Option. And if you haven't read it, you should read it. She's amazing. But one of the sort of shocking things in the book is 30% of the population of the United States doesn't have a driver's license. And some of those people are too young to have a driver's license. Some of them never learned to drive. Some of them are, not driving because they have disabilities, and some of them have aged out of driving and are willing to admit that. And so, that is a huge number of people. And for generations, we've just accepted it, like, oh, well, I guess you're just not part of the country. I guess you just don't get to participate. And you don't get the opportunities that everybody else gets. And you're going to be isolated and probably have a shorter life and less money and less of everything. And no, like, that's a lot of people. Let's rise up, and say, we deserve that. That's 30% of Boulder too. That's 30% of Houston. That's, those people are everywhere. It's not like they're all concentrated in New York City, So, like, I think that's really important to realize we deserve the dignity and respect as non-drivers, that whether it's a permanently non-driver or whether it's just for a day you're not driving, you're using some other mode to do what you're doing. Drivers don't deserve more dignity and respect than other citizens and residents. Yeah.
I think we have to create different social norms around speeding. We created different social norms around drunk driving. Right? It used to be acceptable to have one for the road. But I sometimes jokingly refer to Families for Safe Streets, amazing organization of families that have lost loved ones to traffic violence, like Mothers Against Driving. That, like, we need to create strong social norms against speeding. Like, what I always say, sort of piggybacking off what Sarah said, is that when you drive, you are entitled to a lot of things. You're entitled to your own style of vehicle. You're entitled to your own climate control within that vehicle, your own form of entertainment, music or a podcast, your own choice of passengers. You know, you get to decide who rides with you or you ride alone. What you aren't entitled to is speed. You are not entitled to go faster through the city than someone on a bus, than someone on a bike. And you aren't entitled to move through an intersection before a pedestrian. And so we need to challenge cyclists get labeled as entitled, right? We need to challenge the entitlement that comes with driving. You are not entitled to speed. That's it. If you have a mobility issue, you need to drive, cool. You do not need to go 65 miles an hour through my city. You can go 25 miles an hour, that's just fine. You can go 15, because I can do that on my bike. That's what we're entitled to. Yeah, I think we have to challenge those things. Yeah.
Ryan?
Thank you for saying that the election is the process. I agree. And just one quick historical note. After Iris, City Council a year ago did adopt a resolution to streamline community engagement. It's Resolution 1358. That's one of the reasons why Folsom and North 30th not only were pretty quick, like within a couple of months, but you didn't hear much about it in the news. So thank you for recommending that. My question is, what does the War on Cars think about cars that are shared and automated? So Waymo's coming to Denver. I think a lot of people are wondering, should I still be advocating for public transit because now this great thing is coming? Yeah. Or should we be fighting Waymo? Or what should we be doing with Waymo?
So we've both ridden Waymos. I recently rode the first time in San Francisco. It was cool. It's pretty awesome to get in the car. And then it was safer. It makes full stops at stop signs, and it takes turns slowly, and there's a speed limit. So that's all good. At scale, it'll be a fucking nightmare to have autonomous cars everywhere. And I always say intuitively, think about it. Like, you've been to Paris, you've been to Amsterdam, you've been to Disneyland, you've been to a beach town. Would any of those places be improved if there was just a lot of robot cars everywhere? No. And then the other issue is, we talked about this tonight with some folks, is that they generate so many trips. Like, we were promised with Uber and Lyft that you wouldn't need to own a car because you could just summon a driver, and it is convenient. We use it all the time, right? Like, I'm sure lots of people use it here. But what happened in the end was that traffic got worse in every city where Uber and Lyft and their competitors were operating because of all the deadheading between passengers, where they have to go find their next or wait for their next ride. So the example I like to say is, I'm married, I have 2 children. Let's say I live in the suburbs, and my wife has a meeting on one side of town, I've got a meeting on the other side of town. My son has soccer practice, and my daughter has violin practice. Like, in the traditional version of events, we are a 1 or 2 car family. 1 or 2 of us would just take a kid, drive around, and maybe we'd have 2 trips out there. Well, now I can summon 4 cars. How great is that for me? I don't have to go out of my way. I'll be on time for my meeting. My daughter can go. I can follow her progress in the app and know that she dropped off. Great. But now my neighbor's going to do that. And then my neighbor across the street is going to do that. And suddenly, just through just the law of exponents, 1 block generates 128 trips. That's going to be a fucking nightmare. We need to advocate for transit. Because the other thing is, who's going to be able to afford Waymo? Not the poor people who take the bus. I can afford an $8, 15-minute ride, but I don't know a whole lot of minimum wage earners can afford that. So,
and Waymo actually, it's like Uber and Lyft, is subsidized by venture capital, and
that's why it's so cheap right now.
Yeah, and it's we're getting addicted to it, and then the prices will go up, and also it can be really, really expensive. And it is safer, but there have been a few instances recently that are absolutely verified
in which Waymos are behaving differently. And they're going around school buses that have their stop signs out, and they're making turns in different ways. They're learning, right? Their AI is learning how humans drive. And I don't think that we fully know what they're going to be like in 5 years, and then is there going to be sort of an acceptance of like, well, people don't really stop completely at stop signs, so of course Waymos don't. You know, I'm frankly quite worried about that. I've been working on an episode about robo-taxis for 2 years. I promise it's going to drop in the next 6 weeks or so. But part of the reason that it's been so hard is that I don't really know fully how I feel about it. And I've talked to so many people about it, and I've observed them. And I mean, when we were in Austin, Austin is a place where there's like a lot of it. It's way more than San Francisco and LA. Like there's like, you stand on a main street in Austin for like one traffic light cycle, and you will see 3 or 4 or 5 going by. They're like sort of becoming a major percentage of the traffic. And, you know, I look at that and I'm like, I don't think this is going to end well, because there's just like the idea of so many vehicles, and that are unaffordable and spatially just as stupid as any gas-powered, human-driven
and also
car.
Unaccountable, right? Because so we already have the question of who gets the ticket if there is some sort of incident with a Waymo. If there's no driver. If we go to the company, you know, who's going to be accountable? Will government hold the billionaires accountable, or will they just let them deploy it? You know, I think that like right, fundamentally the war on cars, like we're asking questions about power and who streets are for. Therefore, we the people, like not and for public transportation is we the people. That's one of the beautiful things about the New York City subway system. You know, in a lot of cities, it's like only the poor people who take the bus, and it's stigmatized. It's only low-income people who take public transit. But in New York City, everybody takes the subway, and pretty much everybody takes the bus, although it does trend lower income. And it's a beautiful thing. I call it a civic miracle. You are little like Wall Street dudes, tech bros, and like, you know, the candy stripers and the nurses and the janitors and everybody in between are all sharing public space. That's what we should be striving for, not a place where like 3 dudes can sit by themselves in a car, or 1 person can sit going to like a tech conference. Meanwhile, a bus comes every 35 minutes if you're lucky, so that people can't afford $14 waiting to ride or whatever. So I think that's what we have to push back. But who is this for? That should be the question we ask every time we deploy something new on the street. Who is this for? And if it's not for all of us, then no, sorry. That's all I said.
And stay tuned for that episode.
Yeah.
See, now I'm being
We got a 6-week promise. Post that.
Yeah. So it's like tired.
I've got one. No, we both have episodes that are like our white women. What's yours?
I think we're
What's mine? Wait, so when you asked about mine, I've been working on an episode about Disneyland is moving their Autopia attractions, the driving attraction, from diesel-powered to electric. And there's been a lot of advocates who are using this as a way to advocate for against climate stuff. So that's my way. I've been working on it. I recorded that episode over a year ago. So, yeah.
I think we're about out of time. We have to patiently wait.
Yeah, one more
question. Okay, I have a question about the role that fear can play in driving. I love the episode where Dan Savage, who I just love genuinely, came on and said he never got a driver's license because he was afraid of driving. I'm also in that group, and until I met Eric, I didn't know you could. No, it was an option to be an adult and not drive, because maybe I was scared. Like you inspired me. And so I think that's great. I think we need to bring back fear of driving in teenagers and moms and everyone. So I think that's the question.
Okay, yeah. So I totally agree. And we did do an episode that is a grim episode. It's called The Driver, and it's an interview with the woman who killed somebody in the car. And she has chosen to be public and outspoken about it because she thinks not enough people think about that. And she was not at fault in any, like, I don't think that there's any way that what happened could have been prevented. It really was just one of the things that happens when people drive. And so, and it changed her life in a terrible way. I mean, she just, will probably never recover from that. And I think that we should all be scared every time that we get in a car that that could be us. And I will say that I lived in Maine for a long time, in rural Maine, and was very codependent, and was in a couple of bad crashes that, again, were not my fault. But I saw some things that I wish I hadn't seen, and I think that, and I had always liked driving, and I still like driving sometimes, but I'm more scared of it than I used to be. And it's because I know more about it. The only reason
It's a curse doing it.
Yeah.
but only reason we talk about this in the book, the only reason I think that most people aren't expressing their fear of driving or aware of their fear of driving is because they have to. That for 95% of people in this country, driving is necessary, or maybe not 95, but driving is necessary. They have to do it if they're going to go to work, if they're going to be able to get their kids to school, all of that stuff. And if they think about the fact that they might die or that they might kill somebody every time they turn the key, if they think about the fact that every morning they put their child into the most dangerous thing that their child is ever going to do, that the most dangerous thing that your child is ever going to do is drive with you. That is something that I think people cannot hold in their mind and go about their daily business. So it's actually a very, it's a tough thing because there was a time that I thought that telling people about how dangerous driving is was going to be the thing that was going to, I was like, if we just can make people realize how horrifying this is and how many people die this way, how their chances of dying in a car wreck are 1 in 103 or something like that. It's really, pretty, or it's I can't remember, don't quote me on the statistics, but it's a very high, you have an extremely high chance of dying on the road. And I just think that we've built this thing and we can't allow ourselves to think about it. And so I've vacillated between wanting to terrify everybody and then kind of pulling back from that. But I think that some of the most effective advocacy that I have seen is from Families for Safe Streets, which Doug mentioned earlier. It's now a national organization of family members and loved ones of people who have died in traffic violence. And, those people are incredibly brave because they take their arguments to the state houses and to the city councils, and they stand up and they show that it is something to be scared of. And I do think there's a real place for it. But I think that on a day-to-day level, I try to have compassion for the people who can't think about it. But I think it's really a good thing to say to people, I'm scared to drive. It's too much for me. It's a responsibility I don't want. And it's a risk I don't want to take. It's actually really dangerous. And to just say that, you don't have to say much more than that, because guess what? Every single person in this room, I'll be surprised if there's somebody who can raise their hand and say, no, I don't know anybody, I've never known anyone who was in a bad crash and been previously injured or killed. We all have that. So I think it can be brought into people's awareness, and they can hold it for a little bit. but then they have to put it aside again. But I think it's a good thing. And, I wish that, for instance, the local news, when they're like, there's a traffic crash on, Route 136 or whatever it is, and, so you're going to be delayed by 5 minutes. If they would say that, it looks like there's someone died and isn't going home today, if they would talk about that more. And I think that's something that, I would like to see media do more and treat those deaths as the violent deaths that they are. But again, that's a tough one. But I think it's great to acknowledge your own fear of driving and to listen to your own fear of driving, because it's really dangerous. Yeah.
I mean, I think we should just call it out. I did a lot of improv when I was younger. It was really helpful for my writing and television work. And there's this idea that sometimes you have to kind of call out the game of what's weird or interesting about the scene, and then let's hit that. It's fucked up that every single one of us has the power to kill our fellow Americans by an accident, a whoopsie, you sneeze, you twitch and you hit an ice pack or something. That's kind of fucked up. We built a society where the only way to get around is in a vehicle that if something goes wrong, and something always goes wrong, you could kill your neighbor or a stranger. That's really fucked up if you think about it. I also think, I agree with Sarah that people do hold that feeling as far away from them as they possibly can, because acknowledging it would be well, now what am I going to do? I can't get around. But I also think we have to. The problem is every driver thinks they're above average, right? Which is impossible, of course. So what I would say is the design thing comes back into it again. The drivers are not usually that worried about hitting people, but they are worried about scratching their cars. So we do need to make sure that when we design roads, think about how you drive a rental car when you're returning it from the garage. Slowly and carefully. Don't back up over the spikes and, go this way. We need to design cities where the cost of making a mistake is not to the flesh and bone human, but to the metal, glass, and plastic car. So what's the worst thing that can happen to a driver? A scratch when they open their door in a supermarket parking lot. What if they apply that to driving? That's what we need. And then I think you start to see the behavior change. I don't like to drive for that very reason. I'm not a super anxious person, but when I get behind the wheel, one thing goes wrong, and I'm a motor. Yeah.
All right, I'm also the world first passenger too.
I know that's our last question. I just want to make one last pitch. This is what we're doing. Donate to community sites. If you're not a member, become a paying member, because the bicycle lobby only gets all powerful if it has money. And those of you who have any amount of it, no matter how small, especially no matter how big, please donate to community site local bank. We really want to thank them for hosting them. And thank you to Margaret.
We're going to do the paper, but I want to take a picture. Okay, so I knew this was going to be really informative. I didn't realize it was going to be so fun and joyful and uplifting and inspiring. Even about, I'm sorry we ended on the fear question, but thank you. Brilliant, all of us in this community. And Sue got a cake.